03:48 a.m. September 7th, 2025. Station 8N of the Druzhba pipeline just became the star of Russia's newest, most expensive fireworks show. 2 million barrels of oil a day, a $500 million pumping station, and an explosion so powerful that it was detected by weather satellites. How did a handful of Ukrainian drones, each costing less than a high-end gaming console, pull off the most devastating act of industrial sabotage of the 21st century? It began 14 minutes earlier from a concealed launch truck in Ukraine's Sumy Oblast, just 50 miles from the border. A swarm of 20 AN-196 Lyuchi drones operated by the legendary 14th Separate UAV Regiment under the command of Madhyar himself ripped through the darkness. Each drone no bigger than a pizza box and carrying a 10-pound thermobaric warhead screamed towards its target at 100 miles per hour. They flew just 50 feet off the ground, hugging the terrain to stay under the electronic gaze of Russia's S-400 radar. This wasn't a chaotic rush, it was the Phantom Swarm Cascade, a tactic where the drones flew in constantly shifting pairs to mimic a migrating flock of birds on a radar screen. And the plan hit its first snag. A Russian infantry patrol heard them. The high-pitched whine of 20 electric motors cut through the night. The patrol leader screamed into his radio, and seconds later, a Pantsir S-1 anti-aircraft system came to life. Its twin 30mm cannons opened fire, and 2 drones disintegrated in midair. But this wasn't just about hitting a pipeline. This was the finishing move. After Ukraine had systematically burned Russia's refineries, Russia, the great oil superpower, was forced into the ultimate humiliation, importing fuel. This pipeline was their last lifeline to get that foreign fuel to their starving tanks on the front line. And that's why Ukraine chose this target. Station 8N was close enough for a massive, overwhelming swarm of these shorter-range, high-impact Lyuchi drones. Ukraine was here to sever that final artery, and the loss of 2 drones was a small price to pay for a checkmate. At 03:47 a.m., while Russia shot down 2 Lyuchi drones in mid-air 350 miles to the south, a completely different chase was entering its own critical phase. A lone, long-range UJ-26 Bober drone flying silently at high altitude crossed the final checkpoint on its 3-hour journey. Its target, the massive Ilsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai. This wasn't 2 separate attacks. This was one single coordinated checkmate orchestrated by Ukraine's defense intelligence and executed by Madyar's legendary 14th UAV Regiment. The northern swarm was the battering ram, loud, numerous, and designed to draw all the attention. The southern drone was the stiletto, silent, precise, and aimed directly at the heart. The genius of the plan was to create an impossible choice. Russian commanders were now screaming into their comms about threats in both the north and the south. Do you focus your best electronic warfare assets on the big swarm that's just minutes from your pipeline? Or the lone, silent drone closing in on your biggest refinery? Overseeing it all from 40,000 feet, a Raybird 3 reconnaissance drone served as the operation's eye in the sky, ensuring the chaos was perfectly synchronized. At 03:48 a.m., on the ground at Station 8N, the infantry patrol were taking up defensive positions, their night vision scanning the direction of the attack. The crew of the Pantsir S-1, energized by the kills, were frantically recalibrating their targeting radar, expecting a second wave from the same vector. Inside a nearby truck, a Krasuka 4 operator began an active sweep hunting for the specific frequency hopping signals of the remaining 18 drones. This was a professional layered system now fully awake and angry, and the ripple effect was instantaneous. A flash message screamed across 350 miles to the south. At the Ilsky refinery, floodlights snapped on and the facility's own Pantsir S-1 crew scrambled to their stations. The entire Russian Southern Command was now on high alert. They defending their strategic leverage. That oil flowing through Station 8N wasn't just for their own tanks anymore. It was the crude Russia was forced to import to make up for its own refinery losses, and the very same oil they used to keep countries like Hungary and Slovakia dependent and compliant. A successful strike here wouldn't just be a military blow, it would be a political one, stripping Putin of a key tool he used to blackmail Europe. The Ilsky refinery was even more critical. It didn't just fuel the tanks in Donbass, it was the primary source of jet fuel for every Russian airbase in occupied Crimea and the diesel that powered the Black Sea Fleet. Taking Ilsky offline meant grounding fighter jets and docking warships. It was a single target that could paralyze Russia's ability to project power across land, sea, and air. The Russians knew this, and they had prepared for a conventional fight. But what was coming was something else entirely. At 03:50 a.m., the Russian Panzer operator at Station 8N was ready for the next wave. What he saw next on his screen was an operator's worst nightmare. The swarm of 18 drones didn't attack in a straight line. It broke apart. 10 drones suddenly climbed intentionally, making themselves visible, and then launched their own tiny submunitions all at once. The Panzer's computer designed to track maybe 3 or 4 targets was suddenly faced with dozens. It was a saturation attack designed to make the system crash. But how did they coordinate this while a Krasuka 4 was trying to jam their radios? Simple, they weren't using radio. The drones were talking to each other with beams of light, a technology called Li-Fi. You can jam every radio frequency in the world, but you can't jam a flashlight. This made the multi-million-dollar Krasuka completely useless. While the Panzer was distracted by the chaos above, the remaining 8 drones stayed low and executed the final deception. They changed their heat signature to match a normal civilian truck based on intelligence from hacked CCTV footage of the facility. The Russian guards scanning with thermal optics saw what they expected to see and ignored it. They had no idea they were watching their own doom approach disguised as a morning delivery. At 03:52 a.m., the first shaped charge submunitions hit the ground around Station 8N, not with a massive bang, but with a series of sharp cracks shredding sandbag positions and forcing the infantry to dive for cover. The chaos worked, but the explosion kicked up a massive cloud of dust and smoke, completely blinding the 8 low-flying drones. Their operators' screens, once crystal clear, were now a wall of impenetrable brown. They were flying blind, just feet from their target. The Russian ground commander, seeing his opening, screamed into his radio, "Jam them full power!" The Krasuka 4 operator, ignoring the useless broad-spectrum jamming, focused all of his system's energy into a targeted 2.4 GHz burst the frequency used for the drone's emergency video transmitters. On the Ukrainian screens, the brown wall of dust was now filled with rolling lines of static. They had lost their eyes. At the exact same moment, 350 miles to the south, the lone UJ-22 drone began its final high-speed dive towards the Ilsky refinery. The alarm had been raised. The refinery's Panzer S-1 came alive, its radar locking onto the drone instantly. "Missile away!" the Russian operator yelled. This was the moment the entire operation could have failed. 2 separate fronts, both on the verge of collapse. But the Ukrainian planners in their central command bunker had anticipated this. For the northern swarm, they activated their ace in the hold of Phoenix Relay. High above, at 40,000 feet, the Raybird 3 reconnaissance drone wasn't just watching. It was a mobile 5G cell tower. It switched from passive observation to an active relay, punching a high-bandwidth encrypted 5G signal through the Krasuka's jamming. The static on the Ukrainian operator's screens vanished, replaced by a clear, top-down thermal image from the Raybird itself. They could no longer see from the drone's perspective, but they could guide them like pieces on a chessboard. In the south, the UJ-22 pilot didn't panic. As the Panzer's missile screamed towards him, he triggered his own countermeasure. The drone deployed a cloud of chaff, creating a massive false radar signature 100 feet wide. The missile, programmed to hit the center of the biggest target, detonated harmlessly in the empty air. But the explosion was close enough to damage the drone's control surfaces. The Ukrainian operator was now fighting his controls, the drone bucking violently as it continued its terminal dive towards the main distillation tower. Both fronts were in chaos. Both were taking losses. The Ukrainians were no longer executing a perfect plan. They were in a desperate bare-knuckle brawl to land a knockout punch before their own systems failed completely. At 03:54 a.m. Down on the ground, the Russian commander knew the drones were still out there. He could hear them. He made a smart, desperate call. He ordered his men to stop firing randomly and instead set up overlapping fields of fire aimed directly at the main pumping station, the most logical target. He was turning his entire infantry detachment into a last-ditch close-in weapon system. The first Liuti drone burst through the smoke. It flew directly into a curtain of machine gun fire and disintegrated 50 feet from its target. A second followed and met the same fate. The Russians let out a cheer. Their low-tech solution was working, but they had just revealed their exact positions. The Ukrainian commander, seeing this from the Raybird's thermal view, retasked the remaining 6 drones in a split second. 3 were to continue to the main pump. The other 3 were retargeted to the infantry positions that had just lit up the sky. Simultaneously at Ilsky, the duel reached its brutal conclusion. The Ukrainian operator fought the damaged UJ-22, the controls feeling sluggish. On his shaking screen, the 100-foot distillation tower grew larger. The Russian Panzer operator, his missile reloading, switched to his cannons, putting up a solid wall of explosive steel. Back in the north, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th drones broke through the smoke. They slammed into the main pump one after another in a percussive, overwhelming triple tap. At the same moment, the other 3 drones dove directly into the Russian machine gun nests. In the south, the UJ-22 flew directly through the wall of cannon fire. The operator's screen filled with static as rounds shredded the drone's fuselage, but its momentum was unstoppable. The final image from its camera was the steel lattice of the distillation tower rushing forward. Across 2 command bunkers, hundreds of miles apart, operators watched their screens go black. One of them keyed his mic, his voice steady. "Targets hit! Slava Ukraini!" At 03:55 a.m., the attacks culminated in 2 distinct, brutally effective strikes. At Station 8N, the 3 Liutai drones that broke through the Russian defenses slammed into the main pumping assembly in a perfectly timed 1-2-3 punch. Their 10-pound thermobaric warheads detonated. This was a catastrophic thermal event. The first stage of the detonation dispersed a fine mist of fuel into the air. The second stage ignited it, creating a massive fuel-air explosion that sucked the very oxygen from the air before releasing a devastating pressure wave. Simultaneously at the Ilsky refinery, the heavily damaged UJ-22 drone completed its final journey. Its shape-charged warhead, a PG-7VL, did not explode outwards. It focused all its energy into a single white-hot jet of molten copper moving at over 15,000 miles per hour. This needle of plasma punched through the steel wall of the 100-foot primary distillation tower, igniting the volatile chemicals inside and turning the entire structure into a colossal 3,000-degree Roman candle. The physical destruction was precise and irreversible. The thermobaric blast at 8N, releasing the energy equivalent of 10 tons of TNT, didn't just damage the pumps. It bent the massive inch-thick steel of the Druzhba pipeline itself as if it were a cheap soda can. At Ilsky, the secondary explosion from the ignited chemicals caused a catastrophic structural failure, bringing the multi-million-dollar tower crashing to the ground. The strategic fallout was immediate and crippling. The attack on 8N instantly cut 20% of the pipeline's total capacity, but more importantly, it severed the primary route Russia was using to import fuel to compensate for its own refinery losses. The attack on Ilsky knocked out 30% of the facility's production, specifically the diesel and jet fuel destined for the southern front. In one night with a handful of drones, Ukraine had not only severed Russia's last major fuel artery, but also crippled their ability to process what little they had left. The total damage was estimated at over $300 million, plus the incalculable cost of supply disruption to their war machine. Russian tanks in Donbass would soon be running on fumes. The Black Sea Fleet's fuel reserves would be threatened. And the political humiliation was just as severe as countries like Hungary and Slovakia, still partially reliant on the pipeline, would now face their own shortages, a direct consequence of Putin's war. So here's a tactical question for you. If you were the Ukrainian commander faced with heavy ground fire and losing drones, would you have ordered all remaining drones to hit the single main pump at 8N to guarantee 1 kill, or split them as they did to also suppress